Hello everyone, welcome to Apocalypse Soon. I am your host, the Illustrious Narrator, and today we'll be reviewing a 40-something-year-old film, so there will be spoilers. Threads is a 1984 BBC television film that was directed by English filmmaker Mick Jackson and was written by English playwright Barry Hines. The movie is about the events that take place before and after World War III in the city of Sheffield, England. Threads follows the families of the working-class family, the Kemps, and the middle-class Becketts. Jimmy Kemp is a joiner by trade and is going steady with Ruth Beckett, and the two plan on getting married. Their wedding date is moved up due to Ruth getting pregnant, and the couple plan on getting their own flat after their parents meet for the first time in a formal get-together. Turmoil in the Middle East between the Soviet Union and the United States, due to the nations being at loggerheads over oil and control over the region, starts off in the background, while Jimmy and Ruth plan their future together. Unfortunately, the two superpowers are on the brink of war, which depresses Ruth, who fears the worst. The movie follows the activities of the local town officials in Sheffield. They are moved into a bunker underneath the town hall and are tasked with the duties of picking up the pieces after a nuclear strike on England. As tensions boil over, life around Sheffield grows chaotic as looting, violent quelling of police protesters by the authorities, and all-around fears of the end take over. Both families try to prepare for the worst. The Kemps build a makeshift shelter in their flat according to a government pamphlet that was given to them, while the Becketts prepare a fallout shelter in their basement. After conflict in the Middle East between the NATO forces and the Soviet Union, the two sides go all out against each other, using thermonuclear weapons on the battlefield, and soon they're fired at each other's cities, kickstarting World War III. The Kemps are in the middle of preparing their shelter when RAF Finley, a nearby airbase, is struck with a nuclear ICBM. The explosion causes chaos in Sheffield. Minutes later, Sheffield, being on the NATO strike target list, is struck with a 1 megaton nuclear weapon, which causes widespread destruction. The Kemp's children, Jimmy and his brother and sister, are killed during that strike. Their parents, Bill and Mrs. Kemp, are maimed by the explosion and firestorm. At the Becketts, Ruth and her parents, along with their paternal grandmother, shelter in their basement before the fatal strike on Sheffield. The post-apocalyptic government, who are now bunkered in the town hall, are buried alive and could still conduct their official government business in what is essentially their tomb. They decide on who gets fed and who dies from either starvation and or radiation sickness. Ruth and her family are safe from most of the deadly fallout, but her grandmother dies, and while her parents remove her body from the shelter, Ruth, depressed over believing that Jimmy's dead and her baby might be born either deformed or stillbirth, flees the family bunker and heads into Sheffield. But she wishes she had stayed, as the horrors of the aftermath of the thermonuclear strike drives her nearly to the brink of insanity. Bill Kemp, sick from radiation poisoning, leaves his gravely injured wife in search for water and food. Ruth would eventually make her way to the Kemp's ruined flat and find the dead Mrs. Kemp. She would look for a hospital and find it another more than just a charnel house with overwhelmed nurses and doctors trying to treat dying patients with the basics of first aid. Millions of people die from disease and starvation, while the government is reduced to enforcing martial law due to the chaos of the collapse of society. The buried Sheffield government officials are discovered weeks after the supplies have run out. By the time the military are able to dig them out of the town hall rubble, they discovered their bodies. Ruth eventually gives birth to her daughter, alone in an abandoned building. She names her Jane and continues to travel around England looking for food and shelter. Around this time, Bill Kemp, who has managed to find his way to a recovery operation team, eventually dies from the effects of radiation poisoning. The population of England falls to near medieval era levels, around 7 million people. The survivors, however, due to exposure to radiation and high ultraviolet rays, causes widespread cases of severe cataracts and terminal cancer. Ruth, over a decade later, is one of the survivors affected by this and dies, leaving her young daughter Jane to fend for herself. Jane, who also worked in the fields with her mother, receives a basic minimal education and learns a weaving skill, but she eventually leaves the farming community and joins two teenage hoodlums. The trio steal food for survival, but one of the trio is killed, while the surviving thug rapes Jane. Months later, a pregnant Jane wanders the ruins of a nearby city and finds a hospital where she gives birth to a deformed and stillborn baby. Threads is a one gut to the punch of a film. I saw this movie in high school and it left a huge impact on me. It, to me, seems like a more realistic version of The Day After. While that one felt like a movie of the week to me, Threads was filmed like a documentary, and the characters were written to feel more realistic and relatable. The acting by the cast was great, and Mick Jackson did an excellent job directing. Jackson, prior to this film, made a documentary for the BBC called A Guide to Armageddon, which itself was inspired by the BBC production of The War Game. The script was written by playwright and novelist Barry Hines, whose work focuses on working-class people, and the two didn't get along with each other due to the director himself being from a middle class. But despite the two having conflicting personalities, they managed to create a timeless classic. The movie can be watched on HD Blu-ray, which is now available from Severin Films, or if you have a Universal player, you can get a similar release from the BBC. I happen to have all 3 copies of the films that were released on DVD during the past 10 years. The new 4K release has some of the same extras that are found on the 2-disc BBC set, but the Severin release has a reprint of the government pamphlet that is featured throughout the first half of this film. There are several scenes from this film that are buried forever into my memory. Ruth's walk through Sheffield a week after the missile strike on the city, and witnessing the horrors of her new world, her visit to the only operational hospital in the city, her death, and Jane giving birth to a stillborn child. If you enjoy a post-apocalyptic and apocalyptic films, then you'll want to watch Threads, but be forewarned, it's a dark and depressing film. Well, that wraps up another episode of Apocalypse Soon. I'm your host, the Illustrious Narrator, and remember, there's always room for one more down here in the bunker. I hope to see you soon. Cheerio!